Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Subnet Show. This is not Gabriel Cardona, but I am your host today, Connor Daly, the man with the most cats in crypto himself. And with the camera all to myself today, you may see some of those cats walking around in the background. So this is a special and exciting episode. We actually had a really cool guest lined up this week, but unfortunately, Gabriel got sick and he really wanted to be part of this episode, so we decided to reschedule with our guest. We were going to be talking to John Wu from Ava Labs, but instead I decided to look, first cat appearance. This is Ollie. Just hold him up for you. This is going to be a Twitter Q&A and Meet the Cats episode. So we've got Ollie with us. And yeah, so I wanted to reach out on Twitter to see if you guys had any questions for me, and then I figured I would spend some time just going through them and talking to you guys, the audience. Just very casual, very relaxed episode, and just kind of hear what was on your mind and give any input that I have. So I'm going to just kick things off. So if you want to reach out to me on Twitter or you want to follow for any other opportunities like this in the future, you can follow me at DAS_Connor, DAS_CONNOR. And that's usually the best place to reach me for things like this. So that being said, Mendo Sater asks, how are you? How has your role at Ava Labs changed since you first started, and are you enjoying yourself? Do you see yourself as a long-term employee of Ava Labs for years to come based on your experience with the team, company, and based on your personal feelings about this space? Great question. Nice softball for me to start with. So yeah, I am doing fantastic. I think Avalanche and Ava Labs are doing better than they ever have been. The ecosystem growth has been absolutely amazing. When I first joined the company, we were outside the top 100. We didn't have a permanent place in the crypto mindshare, but we've really come a long way in the last year. And I think that we're incredibly well positioned to succeed going forward. And it's been really cool to be a part of that. And we've also scaled a lot. The company has changed a lot over the last year. We've probably tripled in size since I joined. So it's a very different company now than it used to be. That being said, I'm incredibly happy here. I did struggle a little bit last year with workload and definitely worked a bit too hard at times and didn't take enough breaks. But I think I've been able to kind of switch my focus into team building and hiring. And now that I have the appropriate staff on my team, and I think my work-life balance has been better than it's ever been in crypto. It's still, living in crypto. It's not just working in crypto. It's kind of a whole lifestyle, really, where, even when you're not working, I'm writing about crypto or podcasting about crypto or reading about it. So I definitely still have some balance issues to figure out, but I'm super excited to be in this space, and I'm really enjoying my time at Ava Labs, and I do see myself staying, there for the foreseeable future. I think we have, a big opportunity with. We've showed the world what the C chain can do, but now we're really interested in showing the world what subnets can do. And in particular, I'm working on, building out some projects that can be industry-leading products across all of crypto, on our chains. And I think that's incredibly exciting. I really enjoy working with our ecosystem partners as well. And I just think we're just getting started. So I'm definitely planning to stay. I do think Ava Labs could be, the crypto Google, one of the largest companies in the world, in the honestly not so distant future. So, I'm definitely in it for the long haul. So next question, JF Sane writes in and asks, Subnet versus how the whole net comes together. How will the addition of subnets impact the ecosystem we have now in terms of transaction speeds and fees? This is a great question. And maybe one of the faults of subnet shows we don't talk about subnets enough. So I'm glad there's a lot of subnet questions today. We're really just going to dive deep into all of those. So starting here, so how will subnets impact the ecosystem in terms of speed and fees? So as we mentioned kind of in our subnet deep dive episode, there's kind of two ways to scale blockchains. There's horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. Subnets are a form of horizontal scaling. They'll allow us to distribute blockchain load over many different chains. And I think what we're really going to see is individual dApps and individual applications who have high usage start to branch out into their own subnets. And when that happens, all of those transactions that are on those subnets will be incredibly cheap because they're not going to have the same competition for block space that we have on the main C chain. And so, if it becomes practical and affordable and makes sense to deploy your own subnet, I think we're going to see a lot of people do that so that the fees for their application are incredibly small. And the more subnets we add, basically the more throughput we can add to the system. And the more transactions we can process, the cheaper individual transactions will be. But if as the space gets to be more and more popular, demand will grow, so there will be more competition for block space. So these are going to be balancing factors. If competition and demand grows faster than we can grow supply, then we'll see some fees increase over time. But if we can grow the supply fast enough to keep up with demand, we'll see fees stagnate or go down. And I think we're going to see both an increase in supply and an increase in demand. But I think if we can get subnets right and really, really knock them out of the park, I think we're going to see the kind of adoption that will keep fees very low. So next we have Kaninchin Moger asks, what are the disadvantages of using Moralis instead of coding everything from scratch? So last week on the podcast, 2 weeks ago, we had Ivan on Tech, who is one of the co-founders of Moralis, come and talk to us about the Moralis platform. They recently just had the Moralis hackathon, and one of the requirements to be a grand prize winner was to use the Moralis suite of blockchain applications. So if any of you aren't familiar with this, Moralis is billing itself kind of as the Firebase of blockchain. It allows you to kind of combine some of the best of Web 2 with Web 3 out of the box. And this is something that I'm super passionate about, is how can you use some of the really great cloud computing utilities that we've developed through all these cloud providers and use them in your blockchain applications? Because when you kind of ignore those technologies and you just use Web 3 apps, those apps tend to have poor performance. They load very slowly. They can't store any state for users. They're entirely wallet-based. They can be very confusing to use. So using a tool like Moralis can help shortcut some of those problems of actually doing Web 2 and Web 3 integrations. I think it's a really underexplored space. And so Moralis is just one attempt to do so. Some of the things they provide are like login with wallet that'll create actually like a persistent browser session that you can use to store user state with these logins. And so you don't have to manage like passwords or anything like that, or design your own cryptography scheme for doing these logins. So those are some of the good things about Moralis, but I guess the question is specifically, what are the disadvantages of using Moralis versus rolling your own? And I've never used Moralis personally. I'm familiar with the concept of the technology, but I've never used it on a project. So I can't speak too specifically to exactly what is wrong with it or anything like that. But I would just say in general, the disadvantages are that you have less control over what features you have available to you as far as your Web 2 and Web 3 integration. Moralis might not necessarily provide everything you need. You're also going to have to pay additional fees for Moralis that are probably more than you would if you just kind of implemented the same thing and ran it on your own cloud infrastructure. You also just don't necessarily need to use it if you want to do a pure Web3 application that doesn't have any of those integrations. So it kind of just it depends on your use case. It's hard to be super specific, but I think in general it's a good product, but it's probably not for everybody. It doesn't fit every use case. It also locks you into, I believe, some of the Google Cloud infrastructure. That could be problematic for various reasons. So yeah. I think if you're interested in doing a Web 2, Web 3 integration, definitely investigate it, definitely check it out. But I wouldn't feel too compelled to use anything at this point. We're still too early in the process. There's still too many good tools to be developed that to say that this one tool is going to be the be all end all of all tools. So, all right, next question. Allo_am asks, could you please talk about how you guys are going to prune the blockchain history? So you may have seen on Twitter a lot of conversation talking about super pruning, and this is a really cool feature that's going to help our platform validators. So the way that the C chain works and the way that blockchains work is they basically have a set of state and a set of operations they can do on that state. So they have, let's say, a set of balances. And the C chain will basically remember a balance for every user and every contract that's ever been deployed. And whenever there's a transaction, it will record the new balance. So if I have $100, then I do a transaction sending $10 to Gabriel. My balance gets deducted by 10. Gabriel's gets incremented by 10 as well. So if we both started at 100, I now have 90. He has 110. So the default state of the Ethereum blockchain, which therefore our C chain as well, is that nodes will actually store the state of every block that has ever been issued. So even though my balance at the tip, at the present time is 90 and 110, it actually also has to store that our balances used to be 100 and 100. And it does that for not just every balance, but every smart contract variable, so every token balance, every piece of state in the system. So you can imagine that gets quite expensive when you have thousands of contracts, all, having thousands of interactions per day. When you multiply that out, it gets super expensive, even though the individual storages are only like, one 64-bit 64-bit byte integer. Those amounts really add up. And so kind of what the idea behind pruning is that most nodes don't need to remember the entire historical archive of what my balance was in this particular block. Most of them only really care, what's my balance right now? And so pruning is a way to actually have nodes discard all of the old state history and only hold on to the current set of state. And it turns out that the current set of state is significantly smaller than the historical state. So, these figures are probably being slightly misremembered and are definitely like months out of date. But I think before we started some of these pruning metrics internally, I think the state of and this was also several months ago. We've seen a lot of activity since then, but I think the size of the Avalanche C chain was around like 80 gigabytes, including all historical state. But then when you just extracted the present state, it was only like 200 megabytes or something like that. So multiple orders of magnitude savings in disk space and storage, which will, if you can make those optimizations now, it'll definitely pay off dividends in the long run. What makes the Avalanche kind of pruning and super pruning different from some of the other implementations we've seen on some of Ethereum? I'm not 100% super an expert on this area, so we'll have to have somebody on our platform team on to really discuss the details of super pruning and how it works. But that's basically the general concept. And I just don't want to misspeak for them. But yeah, basically, so it's getting rid of the historical state, only keeping the present state that we need to allow validators to have significantly less disk usage and limit the number of reads and writes that need to happen. Archival nodes will still exist, and it'll still be possible to run your node in that mode without pruning, but the goal is for only a small number of nodes to need to do that, and not to have the entire fleet of validators have to have those storage requirements. So we make it easier to run a validator, make it cheaper, and enhance our long-term scalability. So next question. So AVAX_forever asks, what could be an outcome of not having all validators of the primary network validate a subnet and thus lose decentralization? Due to the consensus mechanism, it can't be for performance reasons. So I think, yeah, this is kind of a common kind of question or concern that comes up, is kind of the security of subnets and the impact of that on decentralization. So the main requirement here is that all subnet validators must also validate the primary chain. So, the primary chains are the X chain, the P chain, the C chain. So you need to be an Avalanche validator. You need to have your 2,000 AVAX that you're staking, and then of those validators, any of those could become a validator on your subnet. So it's not reasonable to expect that. So we do not enforce that you must be a validator of every subnet. You have the choice to opt in, or potentially subnet creators can determine who gets to be a validator on their subnet. It could be a whitelist. So some subnets could have centralized validators. That's totally an acceptable outcome in our system. And this kind of is what enables us to straddle the line between letting users create public and private or semi-private blockchains. And I think this is a pretty cool use case for Avalanche, because it actually allows us to have different levels of visibility and exposure. Back in 2017, there was huge corporate interest in running enterprise blockchain projects, but those projects all kind of sputtered out because there was no way to easily run your own local blockchain within your org or between a couple different orgs, and they weren't ready to go all the way to the public Ethereum network. So this really kind of provides a nice way for centralized validators or for centralized organizations or who just have a small number of actors. So let's say, for example, like Google, Facebook, and Cisco wanted to run a collaborative supply chain private Avalanche subnet. They could do that, and they could make sure that the validators were only from Google, Facebook, and Cisco, and maybe they set up 30 nodes or something like that. Wouldn't be that big a deal. However, we do still have public chains to think about. And what about for these public chains that anyone can use? Does not having every validator forcibly validate that chain limit the security of that chain and potentially compromise some of the decentralization aspects? Well, it depends. I think that's the real answer. At small scales, yes. If a subnet only has one or two validators, then that subnet is not going to be very decentralized. It's not going to be very secure against the types of attacks that validators can do. And to be clear, validators can't do every type of attack. They can't just steal your They can't just steal your funds. There are certain things that a malicious blockchain can do, and mostly it's related to censorship and transaction ordering and inserting their own transactions, more so than like being able to steal your funds. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more for a further question, but I think at super small numbers of validators, I don't think those chains will be, they're asking you to trust the particular validators who are participating, and if nobody's really participating, it's not going to be a robust decentralized system. However, I think what's important to note here is that validating subnets should be profitable. And if it is profitable, I think there's going to be lots of people who are willing to do it. And there's so much stake on the main Avalanche network that if you get that just a small fraction of the main validator set, like even like 1% of validators validating your subnet, that would be a huge gain for you and would be a ton of security already. I mean, if we've got hundreds of millions protecting or if not billions protecting the network, that's still a large chunk of money. It's at the very least like single digit millions or 10-digit millions, and if it's profitable, I think we'll see huge industries pop up around this. If you look at the Ethereum mining, Bitcoin mining, there's no shortage of people who are interested in investing in mining and validation apparatuses. So I think if subnets, maybe the first user acquisition, maybe that's a little bit challenging, but I think as we've seen through initial sales and initial product launches, there's so much excitement that I don't think that we're going to see huge barriers to getting validators. So the real trick is going to be just creating sustainable systems so that we can get easily onboard a bunch of different validators onto a network quickly so that it never has a small number of validators. Okay, next question. Leandro84D asks, what's your opinion on rollups versus subnets as scaling solutions? All right, good question. So first of all, I just want to say I'm not the world's biggest expert on rollups, but I can comment on some of the differences. I don't think rollups solve all of the problems with blockchains. I think there's a lot of different bottlenecks that people have to deal with. You have to deal with consensus bottlenecks, and you have to deal with like state bottlenecks. And roll-ups and state sharing and some of these things, I think roll-ups don't necessarily solve every problem. You actually can build roll-ups as Avalanche subnets if you wanted to build like roll-ups on the C chain. But I think the biggest thing that proponents of roll-ups would say is that they add security, or they inherit security from the main network. I find that to be a bit of a vague concept, but the whole kind of like layer 2 concept, it's just like, do the networks want to be cooperative or adversarial? And I don't think that's necessarily it's more of a social problem than a technological one. But I think rollups in particular are good for doing kind of like state summaries, but I don't think that they really solve the state sharing problem. But I think there's some things that subnets can do that rollups can't. So what subnets do very well is they also allow you to have multiple different layer 1 solutions sitting on top of the same L0 and taking care of the same blockchain fundamentals. So for example, you can run a Solana virtual machine subnet and an Ethereum virtual machine subnet and have them share the same Avalanche consensus, but use the different virtual machines to talk to each other. Whereas with a rollups are very much targeted at like the same base layer. Like it needs to be kind of like EVM language to EVM language, I think. So I see that, just the heterogeneity of subnets and not needing to have the same kind of like smart contract formats. I think that's like a huge advantage for subnets. And I think they it's just like, they're kind of solving for different problems. I mean, subnets are trying to basically be, build your own blockchain as a service. It's not necessarily kind of anointing a one true chain that we must kind of support this one main monolithic chain. Whereas subnets are much more of a decentralized solution where like there will potentially be many different successful chains in their own subnet talking to each other, rather than kind of pushing all of your engineering might into propping up one particular chain. And it's a big topic. I'd rather, I'd like to have a real expert on rollups come in to talk about this one day, but that's just my very high level, not super detailed description. Next question comes from Miller Concours. In case everyone would have their own subnet and use their own tokens for transaction fees, what would be the value proposition of AVAX in the whole ecosystem? How to address the fragmentation among subnets? Okay, so this is another kind of question about subnets and about tokenomics. So again, not financial advice, not speculating on the value of token prices at all, but I guess what is the contribution of the AVAX token to the network? The AVAX token is going to be required to become a subnet validator. You're going to need to use that token to stake to become a validator on the main network before you can start validating subnets. That's, I think, the real, one of the real blockers. But I imagine that, when you have all of these smaller tokens, smaller as in maybe market cap still in the hundreds of millions, maybe billions, but not necessarily like one of the top 10 kind of tokens out there. If these subnets are using smaller tokens as their gas token, I think there do still need to be lingua franca tokens to try to, ease with bridging, ease with price setting, things like that, that people expect to see when they show up in your subnet. So I think AVAX is still going to have a huge place in the ecosystem, the same way like ETH and BTC probably will have a stake in the ecosystem, or a place. So, I mean, I imagine that it's still going to be incredibly popular. Some subnets may choose to do that, to use AVAX as their gas token instead of their native token. It wouldn't surprise me if they do that as well. So, but there will definitely be, the more subnets there are and the more people want to validate, the more demand there will be for AVAX as well. I think there's another question about fragmentation, so I'm going to address that a little bit later. Next group of questions comes from performatives_. So there's a whole group of questions here. So he asks, who is doing a subnet right now? Which also ties into another question by CG Over Yonder, who asks, when do you think subnets will be live, not test subnets? So I will say we do have a lot of developer interest in subnets right now. You've seen WAGME, you've seen Spaces, you've seen these test subnets. Test subnets are live. When are they going to become fully supported? Mainnet subnets, not testnet subnets. I can't talk about timelines. Externally, I will also say that we are seeing a huge interest in subnets and people that are building subnets right now, particularly in the gaming world. There will be a gaming subnet sooner rather than later. I don't think it's going to be, weeks to months, probably, not months to years. So pretty soon. But again, I don't want to talk about anybody's timeline because I don't set those timelines. I don't deliver on those timelines. I don't want to make any promises on anybody else's behalf that they wouldn't even know about because they probably don't listen to this show. But so yeah, I think the subnets are going to be coming sooner. The gaming companies, I think, are going to be the first people you see really move into the space. How many teams are doing a subnet? I'm not in all those calls, so I don't really know, but I would say at least 5 separate teams. That's just a guess. Could be significantly higher than that, but I would say at a minimum, at least 5 teams are building significant subnets right now. What should we look for in a team when we're researching a project? This is a great question. I wrote a Twitter thread about this, about kind of like how to DYOR, do your own research, a while ago. I think that, it's a challenging question, that there's no like perfect answer. There's no formula that you can follow that if you do, you're guaranteed to get a trustworthy team who's going to deliver a good product. I think the questions to ask are like, is this team behaving above board? Do they seem qualified to do what they're proposing to do? Are they delivering? Are they shipping? Or are they just promising? Are they doing things that are blatantly untrustworthy? Are they lying? Are they transparent about their process? Are they, I think we love all of our anonymous contributors in crypto, but sometimes I think I personally assign a bit more skepticism to anonymous founders and anonymous developers than I do to people who are willing to put their name out there and their reputation. So, you just have to be careful and look at, if these people do have what kind of past work do these people have? Do they come up out of nowhere, or do they have a reputation? I think anonymous people can definitely have a reputation, and that's something that is super important. I guess maybe the distinction for me isn't necessarily anon versus doxed, but more just like reputation versus no reputation. For example, our guest last week, Cryptofish, he's anon. I don't know his real name. I've never met him in real life, but I know he's done a ton of work in the ecosystem. I know he's put a ton of work into Trader Joe. And if he has a new project, I'm going to, trust him because of his reputation. Whereas, if I just see a random Twitter handle I've never seen before, new Twitter account created a week ago, that same level of trust boundary isn't there, regardless of whether that person has a real name on their profile or an anime profile picture. So another question from Performatives, what's up with all the cats? I say that I'm the man with the most cats in crypto. Have not been proven wrong yet. But the real story is that I had I got my first cat. I grew up with cats. I love all of them. I really enjoy their company. Had several growing up. Then when I went to college, didn't have any cats for a few years, really missed them. That was like my biggest goal. When I accepted my job, moved to a new place, first thing I wanted to do, get a cat. So I had my cat before I even had furniture in the new house. It was the first thing I did. Had like one chair, a rug, and a cat. And so I got my first cat, when I first started my job. Then a year later, it was time for cat number 2. So I had 2 cats. They could be friends. Then later on, I met my then girlfriend, now fiance. She had 1 cat as well. She got a second cat after I met her. So she had 2 cats. I had 2 cats. We moved in together. Now we have 4 cats, and I love them all. So I have you met Ollie earlier today. I also have an orange tabby named Flash, a long-haired multicolored gray cat named Sarabi, and then a short hair gray tuxedo kitty named Nala. So those are the 4 cats. This is also the cat intro podcast. I've been meaning to write a Twitter thread introducing all of them, sharing some good pictures. So I'll get to that one day. But that's my cat story for now. Humboldt Capital asks, Subnets will require users to add a metamask network or depends on config? So again, this is a good question, and I think this is something that there's kind of a current state of things, and I think there's going to be a future state of things. Right now, each subnet has its own RPC endpoint, its own API that has to be called, its own set of providers like Infura or Alchemy or the Avalanche nodes that allow you to make API calls to it. So right now, every subnet has a different one, and so we have to spin up a different one, and in your MetaMask, you need to add a custom network. But I think, I wouldn't be too constrained by what the current state of tooling is, because subnets are a relatively new paradigm. Nobody's been able to build something like this where people can practically spin up new blockchains very cheaply, very easily, very quickly. So it's okay that the old tools don't support this brand new use case, because this use case hasn't existed before. If subnets have been out for 5 years and the user experience still sucks, that's a different problem. But I think we'll see definitely tools in the future that will help ease the burden of switching networks and adding new networks super seamlessly. So Humboldt Capital also asks, subnets transactions will be available on Snowtrace. Will devs need to stand up separate instance, or depends on config? Another, kind of exact same question. Right now, all the infrastructure is extremely separate, but I know, Ava Labs is working on some solutions for this and trying to figure out, what is the minimum viable package of infrastructure that's required to run a subnet. You need API nodes, you need an Explorer, you might need some other stuff. So can we create a package of infra that can be stood up very quickly? Or could we do this through partners, not necessarily just ourselves, but just be able to stand up everything that we've built over the last few years to run the C chain Could we just stamp that out as a service on demand? I think that's the real dream, is that, you know, you launch your subnet via a script. You know, the way I think about it, I love the metaphor of launching an instance on Amazon EC2. You go through, you select all of your variables in your GUI. You say, I want this one to run Linux. You know, I want this much CPU, this much memory. You do the same things with Subnet. I want it to be an EVM chain. These are all the plugins I want. Give me the, you know, the Explorer instance, the API node instance. Click go, and then it just launches, and it stands it all up for you. That would be the coolest model in my mind. So yes, it would need a separate Explorer right now, but, you know, internally and externally, we're looking at solutions for getting Explorers up as fast as possible. And then he also asks, are bridges required between C-chain and subnets? Short term, yes. Long term, no. I think there's still some question about like what our cross-chain asset transfer strategy is. So I don't think we've like fully committed to anything externally, but I think the subnet concept will only work if cross-chain or cross-subnet asset transfers are super seamless. Because liquidity fragmentation is a problem, and I think the question kind of came up earlier, and I kind of kicked it, you know, just a little bit. But yeah, basically, you know, if somebody launches their own subnet, it needs liquidity. It needs easy access to liquidity. And so this is why you need to be able to just move all of your tokens from the main chain to a subnet, or from the subnet to back to the main chain. And so there's two ways to do this. You could do this through bridges and external applications that do kind of a lock and burn thing, or they could do liquidity pooling on either side. But ultimately, I think the best solution is to have a protocol level call that basically every subnet just needs to implement an API, and then have the transfers go across the network. And there's a couple of different implementations we're talking about for how to do this. Where that gets slotted into the roadmap, there's a lot of other stuff going on right now, so I'm not sure when it'll be delivered. But I think that's the plan in the long term. But it's not ready today. It's not going to be ready in a couple of weeks. So the question is, what do you do in the meantime? And I think bridges are probably the best example. And I think we're trying to look at, you know, what are the best bridges that we can help partner with to help the ecosystem set up subnets and transfer liquidity as seamlessly as possible. Jonah Perk asks, could you talk about staking AVAX to secure subnets? For instance, do validators have to stake a minimum amount for each network they are validating? What are the implications of AVAX price for launching new subnets? What is the number of validators for a subnet? Okay, so I think I talked about some of this. I'm not going to talk about implications on the AVAX price because I don't comment on any prices. But I think there's a question. Do you have to stake additional AVAX to validate each network? I think it's going to be up to the subnet developers. You have to stake your initial 2,000 or whatever the threshold ends up being at the time to become a validator of the main network. The subnet could require additional properties to become a validator of their network, but they do not necessarily need to. They could allow any validator to become, any mainnet validator to become a validator on their subnet, or they could say you have to stake our token. So if I'm making the Connor subnet, you need to stake 100 Connor tokens to be a Connor validator. That should be up to the subnet creator. Dial Schlupp, I like that name, asks, do validators have to silo themselves to a single subnet? No, I do not believe so. So I don't believe that these validators need to be on the same machine. I think the biggest constraint there is hardware of like, can you actually validate multiple subnets on the same box? And I think the answer is probably going to be no. So you probably need to be able to spin up multiple hardware. So as long as you're sharing the same like keys between those boxes, which if you're standing them up yourself, you can probably kind of handle that key distribution problem. As long as the number of servers you're managing isn't too large. But as long as you can do it across multiple boxes, there really shouldn't be any limit to how many subnets you can validate. Jamari Peterson asks, friend of the show from Snowball Finance, asks, if you were given 3 to 6 months to build whatever you wanted, what would it be? Coming in, trying to get me to leak some alpha here, drop all my theses. I'm not ready to do all of that. So I'll just give out some examples. I think right now I'm really interested in infrastructure plays. I think individual apps are maybe like, they're like hit or miss of like, it's always just like, is my thing going to take off or won't it? I feel like infrastructure can be a little bit more solid because you can form some partnerships and, support a lot of projects and provide value to a lot of people. So I like those personally. And I'm really interested in that intersection of Web 2 and Web 3. Some of the stuff like Moralis is doing, but for some of the other, just kind of basic operations, I think if I had to build an app though, and not necessarily an infrastructure play, I would probably focus on something like crowdfunding. I think payments are a really underexplored part of crypto right now. Like, we did DeFi for a year. Now NFTs are the hotness. Payments haven't really been talked about since like 2012. Not really, more like since 2016. But now that we've got these cool apps, people aren't thinking about just how to manage payments. But I think just a lot of the challenges I've seen talking to different DAOs and stuff is how do you run payroll? How I'm really shocked that today that I can't. There's no really easy way to run a Kickstarter or to do an OnlyFans or a Patreon that's entirely crypto native and non-custodial. I'm sure that there's some people working on it, but I don't think anything has taken off and gone mainstream. But it seems like the appetite is there, and I don't think I think with social media there's a lot of appetite for decentralized social media as well. I think that's harder to do than crowdfunding, because crowdfunding can kind of like literally be just like ways to aggregate token transfers. And there are some cool projects. There's one called Fluidity or something like that. Oh, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they do payment flows, which basically will do, pay you per second. So instead of getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, I get paid per block essentially. And I can withdraw my salary at any time. Oh man, I forget what they're called. I actually had somebody, I know somebody who started there recently, but yeah, I think payments are underexplored. I think crowdfunding's underexplored. Whenever these cancel OnlyFans, let's go crypto kind of trends comes out, I haven't really seen anything really capitalize on that zeitgeist. So I think that's something that's super underexplored right now. And if I could get a quick prototype, I think that could be pretty successful. All right, just a couple questions left. So Soul not gonna make it, or NGMI asks, the art scene is growing rapidly on AVAX. What do you think about the one-of-one collections on AVAX? Yeah, I love all of our NFT collections that people have been launching. I've seen a lot of really cool stuff. I think the particle collection recently was a really cool thing with the Banksy sale. But yeah, I think the NFT games have been really taking off. I think those are really cool. And honestly, I can't even keep up with all of the different NFT collections launching on Avalanche. So I'm really super stoked for the ecosystem in general. I don't have a ton that I'm keeping my eye on right now, but every time I see them, I get super stoked, super happy that creators are being able to make cool stuff and get paid for it. I mean, it's awesome. So this user also asks, what is some advice you would give to someone who's a little seasoned in the space but trying to get to the next level? Great question. So it depends what you mean by seasoned in the space. I mean, I think I would say, there's a couple things I would say. The most important thing that I will always say over and over and over is if you want to take your skills to the next level, you just have to build something. And it's very easy to do Solidity tutorials or whatever and just say like, oh, I know how to build a smart contract now. but actually go build one. Like pick an app, build the crowdfunding thing I mentioned, whatever. You guys can take that one. It's a freebie. If you can actually go build a project, you will find out all of the things you don't know. And it doesn't really matter what level of skill you are if you can build this thing and it works and it's secure. You know, it's not, skill level can be a bit of an ego thing. At the end of the day, like what matters is, can you build this or can you not build this? And if you can build this, you're at a good level. Don't worry about it. If you can't build it, if you actually just try to start building it, like don't be afraid of it. Like just actually jump in, try to think about, write down, like what are all the components that need to happen? How would I do this? Figure out what you don't know, figure out where those gaps are, figure out what you can't do, and try to figure out how to do them. Either, Google around, see if the solution's simple. Can you just like do a tutorial or something like this? If you're really lost, try asking for help. There's definitely a lot of people who are interested in helping, on Twitter, on Discord, whatever. So I'd say building is the number one thing that, will help you, really level up your skills. The other thing that I think would help you, if you really want to go to the next level, is specializing. I think this is Ivan on Tech, mentioned this, and I've kind of had a similar thought that it's really pretty incredible how fast you can become one of the world's leading experts on something in crypto. And you can become one of the best developers in the space in only a couple months in a particular subfield of crypto, not necessarily overall. But to do the same in like traditional web development would take you 20 years because there's just so much competition. But here it is really possible to take over a niche and become the most prominent person in that niche pretty quickly. So I would say if you really want to become an expert, like the thing to do is to specialize. Pick an area, art, NFTs, tokenomics, governance, lending, whatever. Go through all the projects in that space for that small niche field and try to understand all of them. Like read all their documentation, look at their actual smart contracts, figure out exactly how they work. And if you can understand how all the biggest projects and how some of the smaller projects that are maybe pretty innovative too in that space work, then you will have literally learned almost everything in the space. And just ask yourself questions like, what's wrong with this? What could be better about this? Why isn't this a different way? How could I improve this? And if you ask yourself those questions and you can come up with some answers to them that are the right answer, then you should be one of the experts. You can actually kind of conquer the whole domain and then give yourselves enough ideas that then you are able to go build something. And with that inspiration, with that domain knowledge that you have, and you now know everything that's going on in the field, you can go build something, and you can build something incredible. You can be an expert. So that's how I would say, is the way to level up. All right. So next, CryptoPup asks, how do subnets avoid liquidity fragmentation? All right. Yeah. So this is a good question. I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but yeah, it all comes down to having, good bridging and good cross subnet transfers. And so, yeah, we're still trying to work on that at Ava Labs of trying to make sure that we provide the best options for our ecosystem. But beyond that, I think it's just really going to help to have good processes that people respect, and maybe not necessarily having a DEX within each subnet, trying to see as much as we can do across subnets. I think that's really helpful. There's different types of bridging solutions where some are like liquidity based, so no cross subnet transfers actually need to happen. There's some different stuff that can go on, but it is a hard problem. I agree. All right, and closing us out, Crypto Bearish asks, what do you think of Pangolin's approach on being a cross-chain DEX in the version 2.0? Great question. I'm super proud of that team. I think they have done a fantastic job. The V2 site looks incredible. It's so much better than it used to be. The designer, Abdullah, they're crazy fantastic job. Super proud of all of that work. They've been working on this for a ton of time, and I think the result is just beautiful. I kind of like the old token logo a little bit better. Don't tell them, but other than that, I think it's awesome. V2, I think it's going to be an incredible success. I love their super farms that they're doing right now. I think the partnerships with UST, is a great direction, and I'm just really happy to see that team firing all cylinders. When it comes to the cross chain, I think that's a sensitive subject for some people, but not so for me. I think that because Pangolin is the number 2 DEX on Avalanche right now, they're not like super. There's definitely some room for them to grow, and they're not like a multi-billion-dollar protocol right now, and so they need to explore all options for revenue that they can, and making sure that token holders can capture as much value as possible, and trying to make sure that the protocol survives a bear market if one ever comes. And so, I mean, they're extremely Avalanche bulls. Like, they love Avalanche, they want to stay on Avalanche, but they also aren't going to turn away opportunities to make money elsewhere. I think the biggest concern when somebody adopts that kind of approach is, does your focus get spread too thin, and then you kind of end up jack of all trades, master of none? But I think I really believe in the team and their ability. I think one of the things that really sets them apart is their ability to form strategic partnerships, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I think they want Avalanche to be the mothership where kind of all funds and revenues will trickle back to, but kind of branch out and try to get new customers, be where other people aren't, and keep the protocol alive. And that's something that I'm super supportive of. But yeah, I think I'm super excited about their trajectory, and I think they're going to do amazing. So that is it. This has been your episode of the Subnet Show for this week, coming in, I guess, a little under an hour. But yeah, I had a nice time talking to you guys. I will have to do this again sometime. It was good. I think clearing the backlog. I get a lot of questions, so glad I was able to knock out a bunch of them. And like I said, if you like this podcast and you want to hear more from me, you should definitely follow me on Twitter, DAS_Connor, DAS_CONNOR. You should also like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're super thankful for your support. We recently crossed 1,000 subs, and Gabriel and I are over the moon about it. It took us 6 months. It was a lot of work, but we're super excited about the future of the Subnet Show, and we plan to do way more. We have so many great guests lined up this year, and if there's any guests you want to see, let us know in the comments below. All right, I'm gonna have to sign us off now. So, from Snowflake to Avalanche and through consensus to the stars. See you next week.